So in this video, we're going to look at the 6 main types of microorganisms that we're going to come across in this class. Some more than others. Uh, there are certainly ones that make a bigger name for themselves, like the bacteria. We hear a lot about bacteria. Most of the time it's in the bad sense. We hear about bacteria involved in making people sick. And this image here I have here could be one of those bacteria that does make people sick. It could be E. coli, it could be something called Shigella, any number of different things. But we're going to talk about that in this class. We're also going to talk about fungi. Here I'm showing you some microscopic images of the spores that are being formed by the fungi. But we also have within the same group, besides the bread molds, we are going to have the yeast that is used to make bread and beer, that sort of thing. We'll also talk about protozoa. And here you can see these little single-celled, neat-looking things. We're going to talk about them, like I said. What we find sometimes put in with protozoa, the scientists are still messing around with classifications, but we'll find algae, some algae listed under the protozoa. We'll find some algae listed somewhere else. We're also going to talk about helminths, which you might just want to think of as being worms. Now, worms can be certainly something that we can see, and that would be the term macroscopic. But a lot of their infectious stages are microscopic, and that's why they have a tendency to get thrown in with microbiology. Sometimes not, sometimes they do. A lot of universities will have worms put in with the microbiology curriculum. We're also going to talk about viruses. Now, viruses are considered to be non-living organisms. If you have them outside of the cell, they're not going to be doing anything. They have to get inside your cell, and then they use everything that your cells has made, and they take advantage of it, but they lack the characteristics of life, which we'll talk about at some point in time in this class. And then another group that gets put under this, which would again be a non-living sort of microorganism, is something that's called a prion, which is actually happens to be a protein gone rogue. We'll talk about that some more too. The prion diseases, we don't see too many of them. You've heard of mad cow's disease. CJD, which is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, is the human version of that. So with the bacteria, some of the characteristics of them are they're going to be simple. They're going to be single-celled organisms. We talked about that in the first video. These are the prokaryotic organisms. Their cell walls are going to have a material that's called peptidoglycan. And if you look at the word peptido, that refers to protein in nature, which means it's going to be made up of amino acids. And then glycan means sugar. These organisms are going to divide by a process that we call binary fission, which basically means they replicate or duplicate their DNA, and they split in two. And this is asexual reproduction. You don't get any recombination of DNA from two I in this manner. And so when a cell splits into two, you get two identical cells as a result. And I threw in some pictures here. These are the cocci bacteria that I mentioned in the first video. A good example of this would be Streptococcus, as in Streptococcus pyogenes. You may know that as strep throat. And then here is some rod-shaped bacteria. The fungi are eukaryotic organisms, so that means they're going to have a nucleus. And we happen to find these organisms, some of them, as unicellular, meaning that they exist as a single cell. Now you look at this and you say, oh, well, all these cells are here together, but honestly, they're not working together. They just happen to kind of be attached to each other or close by, but they're competing for the nutrients that are available, and they would just assume that the one next to them dies because it's stealing some of their food. So these are definitely unicellular organisms. There are certainly multicellular ones, and we know those as the molds and the mushrooms. The spores can be really tiny, and that's how the organism gets spread around, is through these spores. We threw in this nice little picture here of fungal infections. we come across that can chew on your nails, eat up the outer layer of your skin. They can cause diaper rash or ringworm, any number of diseases that we come across. They tend not to be as out to get you as the bacterial diseases, although there are a problem. The protozoa are also eukaryotic organisms, but we don't find multicellular protozoa. They're all going to be unicellular, and a lot of them prefer to live in water. There are some examples that the organisms that don't live in water per se. They might be living inside an insect. Malaria is a good example, but a lot of them are going to be found in water. And what we're going to do with those is we're going to categorize them according to how they move. Some of them have these little short hair called cilia that create kind of a wave pattern that helps them move. I showed you flagella on the previous video. Some of them are amoeboid, which means they send out an extension of their cell. It sort of like acts as a foot and then drags the cell along with it. In fact, amoeboid cells will actually send out extensions, surround bacteria, and then engulf the bacteria and eat them. It's really kind of a neat thing. Some examples of protozoa. Many of you have probably heard of Giardia. Whenever you go hiking and you're not going to take all the water that you need, people will say, well, be sure you treat the water somehow, filter, chlorine tablets, that sort of thing. This is a particular staining technique that shows what Giardia looks like. It's kind of neat. It's got these two little things that look like eyes. They're not, but they stain that way. And it's got this, to me, what looks like a smile. And unfortunately with Giardia, it's you could say, ha ha ha, I'm smiling at you because I know I'm going to give you some really nasty diarrhea that you're not going to want. And the Naegleria fowleri, you probably haven't heard of Naegleria, but you probably have heard of the brain-eating amoeba. And that's exactly what it is. And they're showing you brain after an autopsy from somebody that died from it, where it started chewing up the brain, causing hemorrhage and killing cells. And the death rate from this particular amoeba is extremely high. We're talking 99% of the people or higher are going to die from this thing. So it's not something you want to come across. On the helminths, we have worms, but we also have things that are called flukes. Fortunately for us, these flukes do not use the force. But again, they do have these microscopic life stages. They do grow bigger. This Ascaris here is one of the largest ones, but you get infected through its eggs, which are microscopic, and then it grows inside you. You can see it's quite large. Others will grow in large masses like this, and then when you discover that you have this infection, we actually use the term infestation with this, and you're given some medication, you'll pass this big wad of worms. Kind of disgusting thought. And there's others like this guinea worm that infect you for a while. You may not even know you have it, and then when the times come for them to leave, it'll stick its little head out, and then what doctors will do in these areas where it's prevalent is they actually start winding it around something and pulling it out slowly so it doesn't break off in there and continue the infection cycle. Then we have viruses, and here I have the term acellular particles. Acellular means they are not composed of a cell. A lot of times when you see the prefix a or an in science, it means without. So these are particles made up of a nucleic acid, either DNA or RNA, and we'll learn more about those in another chapter, and surrounded by a protein. We can also describe them as being obligate intracellular parasites. Obligate means there's an absolute necessity for them to be inside a cell, and when they're inside the cell, they're going to be a parasite. And a parasite is something that is going to damage the host. It has a relationship with the host cell, and the host cell receives nothing from it. The infection, in fact, the host cell is usually harmed, if not killed. Viruses are very, very small. We're looking at the nanometer range, which is 10 to the minus 9 meters, which is quite small, and it's below the detection of the microscope. So we cannot analyze an infection by a virus using a microscope. We have to have other techniques. And these are quite simple. They have a nucleic acid, they have a protein coat, and that's it. Outside of a cell, they're not doing anything. They're just sitting there. I mean, they're even lazier than cats, if you want to put it that way. And they have all sorts of different shapes. Here's an Ebola virus. It kind of looks like a long filament. Here we have the hepatitis B. The hepatitis B in this picture are these ones that are pretty close to being round. This other stuff is just things that happen when you do the electron microscope prep. So viruses are not eukaryotic organisms because they don't have nucleuses, they don't have organelles. They're not prokaryotic organisms either because they lack ribosomes, they are not a cell, and some of them don't even have DNA, they have RNA instead. So from the standpoint of organisms being eukaryotic or prokaryotic organisms, we're not going to find viruses in that. And so we consider them to not be living. There's some interesting not micrographs, artist's image. This has been an electron micrograph that's been colorized. And what's interesting on this one is you can see these little structures on the outside. This actually helps the virus find the right cell so that it can infect it. What's even more fascinating is we actually have viruses that infect bacteria, and they kill the bacteria. We use the term bacteriophage. It looks sort of like what I think of as a lunar lander. Rather interesting, and we may get into that in another one of the chapters as well. And then the last group is the prions. They are entirely protein in nature. They're described as being infectious because once you get one of these proteins inside you and it gets to your brain, it actually encourages other proteins that you have normally in your brain to go rogue. In other words, change their shape and become infectious as well, which is not good. And they're showing you it's a normal protein that you happen to have, but then something goes wrong with it and it changes its shape, and that causes it to be infectious. And this protein is really, really hard to get rid of. The sterilization techniques that we use on equipment that's been contaminated is rather extreme, and we also find 100% mortality rate with this, as we have no cure for it. Here is what normal brain tissue would look like, and then they're showing you what happens if it gets infected with one of these prion proteins and the damage that it causes. And you can see that these don't look anything like that, and they don't look healthy by any stretch of the imagination.